Imagine signing a document promising you won't regulate an industry because you personally profit from it. Now imagine getting caught regulating it anyway. And when people ask questions, a waiver suddenly appears. Because according to government watchdogs, that's essentially what happened. Meet Karen Budfallon, the number 3 official inside the U.S. Department of the Interior, one of the most powerful land management agencies in America. The agency that oversees hundreds of millions of acres of federal land. Land that belongs to the public. Your land. My land. Everybody's land. Now here's where things get interesting. Karen Budfallon and her husband reportedly own 5 ranching operations that rely on more than 250,000 acres of federal grazing land. 250,000 acres. And because of those business interests, she signed ethics documents in 2018 agreeing she would not work on federal grazing policy. Makes sense. If you profit from ranching, you probably shouldn't be writing the rules for ranching. That's Ethics 101. Most people learn that lesson in elementary school. Don't grade your own homework. Don't referee your own game. Don't write rules that benefit your own wallet. Simple. Then, according to watchdog groups and reporting surrounding the case, she returned to government service. And suddenly a conflict of interest waiver appeared in the ethics database. Quietly. No big announcement. No press conference. No explanation most Americans ever heard. And then came the quote. The quote that turned an ethics concern into an angry Otter story. Karen Budfallon reportedly told a Congressional Western Caucus event that grazing policy was closest to my heart. Her heart. Not her ranches. Not her grazing permits. Not the businesses directly affected by the policy. Her heart. This isn't some obscure Washington paperwork dispute. Because federal grazing policy determines things like permit access, grazing fees, environmental reviews, land use restrictions, conservation requirements. In other words, money. Real money. The rules governing public land directly affect the profitability of ranching operations across the American West, including, critics argue, her own. And that's why watchdog groups have demanded investigations. Because government only works when people believe the rules apply equally. Once people start believing powerful officials can simply wave away conflicts, trust disappears. Fast. And think about the scale. 250,000 acres. Most Americans will never own a quarter acre. Some won't own 1/10 of an acre. We're talking about enough land to disappear entire towns into public land, managed by government officials who are supposed to act in the public interest, not personal interest. And this is where I'm going to lose it.
You signed the document. That's the whole story. You signed it. Nobody forced your hand. Nobody tricked you. Nobody hid the fine print. You signed an ethics agreement because everyone understood something obvious. If you own ranches that depend on federal grazing policy, you should not be making federal grazing policy. Period. End of discussion. And yet somehow we keep ending up in these situations where powerful people discover a magical loophole, a waiver, an exception, a special circumstance, a reason why the rules apply to everybody else but not them. Funny how that works. And notice how this always happens. The people making decisions are never the people dealing with consequences. The rancher doesn't get the permit denied. The regulator doesn't lose access. The policymaker doesn't absorb the cost. The public does, because that's who owns the land. The public. You, me, everybody. And every time government officials blur the line between public service and personal profit, they damage something bigger than any single policy. They damage trust, because eventually people stop asking, is this legal? And start asking, does anybody in charge actually believe the rules apply to them? And once a country starts asking that question, you've got a much bigger problem than grazing policy. Apparently, conflict of interest forms are more like New Year's resolutions now. Everybody signs them, nobody plans to keep them.
Subscribe to find out who makes the Otter angry next.
All individuals mentioned are presumed innocent of any wrongdoing unless proven otherwise through appropriate legal or administrative proceedings. Reporting discussed is based on publicly available ethics disclosures, watchdog allegations, and public statements. The Angry Otter is not a licensed ethicist, ranch hand, grazing permit administrator, federal land manager, conflict of interest waiver specialist, or part-time cattle psychologist. Side effects may include outrage, distrust of government paperwork, and repeatedly asking, wait, that's legal, for the remainder of the day.